Well, hey, Eddie, how are you?
Kim,
I
I'm
have,
fantastic. How are you today?
I am good. It's so good to see you. We see each
Brilliant.
other few and far between. I used to see you on the road all the time. How's everything going?
Everything's going tremendously well, and you're right. We saw each other in person in various different cities all around the world. It feels like, we're best friends, and this is the first time we're peering into each other's homes.
I know, I know. And for all of those that are listening, this is my friend and one of our colleagues and one of our FutureCon supporters, Eddie Doyle. He's a keynote speaker and chief strategist from Checkpoint Security, and he is going to be my guest on this week's episode of Voice of America and Security for All. So, Eddie, why don't you just give me some updates on, I know you have your hands in a whole bunch of things. I saw you on some sort of what is this thing you're doing with James Azar? I saw you
Yeah,
on.
James Azar, totally cool guy. So that's the Tech Town Square. So we do this every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. So thanks for letting me give it a little bit of a plug there. But it's a fun thing that we're just both voluntarily doing because we found that, I gravitated to technology at a very early age just because I'm a gadget geek. I'm not an engineer, right? I'm not somebody that does the coding. I just love gadgets, right? So back in the day when GPSs weren't in a sizable watch, I had this great big clunky GPS on my bicycle, right, on my mountain bike, and I used to trek around with that, and this was in my latter teenage years, and it was a lot of fun. But because I grew up with that kind of curiosity and interest, technology to me doesn't seem quite as magical, I think, as it does to many others. And it's quite confusing for people. So James and I decided to say, okay, let's have a town square forum where we can just break down any technological sort of, news, current affairs. Like last week, we did the military coup in Myanmar because they shut off the internet. So what would you do if the internet got shut down permanently in the United States? It's a great question, right? So we go through these kinds of scenarios. So that's been fun. It's a podcast. And what else have I been doing? Look, I mean, life for me is somewhat normal, except that I don't have plane delays, right? I mean, I switched standing on the stage to a live audience to staring into the lens of a camera. You know what it reminds me of, though, Kim? My first time many years ago keynoting in Tokyo. Now, I was standing on the stage. It was a mildly large crowd, so there were enough lights in my face where I couldn't see the crowd. But as a keynote, you can hear them, right? You can hear it when a pin's going to drop, and that's when you know you've arrested the attention of the audience. You can hear all sorts of, murmurs and laughter when you're on point. Well, when I got off stage, this was my first keynote in Japan, so I wasn't used to the customs. This was quite a few years ago. I walked off stage and it was dead silence, no applause. And I thought, oh no, I bombed, right? It's like, what happened? And so I'm backstage getting my microphone off and I'm talking to the guys there. And I'm like, look, guys, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. Like, no one clapped. I mean, I wanted to shrivel into a hole. And they said, Eddie, everybody's standing up bowing, right?
Oh
They're
my
all bowing. You got a
goodness.
standing ovation, but I couldn't see it because of the lights in my face. Well, being a virtual keynote speaker is kind of like that, because many times I'm looking right into the lens of a camera, and if I'm going to crack a joke and no one laughs, it's kind of a disappointing feeling, right, Kim?
I hear you. I mean, because we've been doing these virtual events. I think we're probably up to 40 events. It's been a year ago since we pivoted to virtual. But one of the reasons I brought up your town square, because I thought it was very interesting, because my new show on Voice America is called And Security for All, and it just breaks down the same things. We're all hearing these big words, especially the everyday person that's not in our field. And what do these words mean? What last week we were just talking about different type of phishing attacks and all these new words for these new ransomwares that have been happening. But this
Yeah.
week, I think our listeners are going to really love what we have to talk about, especially the C-level execs and the CISOs that are bringing in these new policies. And I'll let you take it from there, because why don't you just lead the path on what's happening after that
Well,
occurs?
and exactly our initial dialogue there on being able to sort of translate technical issues, complex technical ideas to the layperson. That's really what this is about. And this is what I want to discuss this coming Friday. I think it's tremendously important. I think of my 79-year-old mother when I think of technology. If I can explain it in a fashion, and actually not even need to explain it, if the technology will work in a fashion where my 79-year-old mother can use it, great. Because you have to look at communication, necessary communication, like it is an error. If I have to communicate it, now there is an error. Now, we do have to communicate. Think of phishing training, right? We give an entire corporation phishing training. So the CISO sends his or her team members out, go find some great phishing training for me. All right, let's give this to the entire organization, 20,000 employees. So all the employees get it. They spent a ton of money. It looks really cool. You know, there's a PowerPoint slideshow, maybe some videos. Maybe they got a famous person to do the voiceover. I mean, they spent production money. Okay, this is great. And now we're going to push this out to all the users. The very next day, and this is what I hear time and time again from all my CISO friends and colleagues in the industry, the very next day, there's a video circulating around the entire corporation of a fat cat tripping over a mouse. It's like, why are they clicking on this? This was my phishing simulation. And 50% of the staff will go ahead and click on an unknown link the day after a phishing training. Why? It's because of this issue of communication. How do we take incredibly complex ideas when people aren't the gadget geeks that I grew up as, where people aren't deeply involved in cyber like you and I are today? And how do we explain it without the assumed knowledge that we have, without the decades of experience that I have in my head, and I say to somebody, use some complex term, or even a term that I don't think is complex, I'm still using vocabulary that's been built over decades. And so I want to talk about that because I consider it to be the greatest vulnerability and greatest challenge in the life of a CISO. We've got some amazing tools today. We've got computers in our pockets. You know, we've got security software on those computers in our pockets. This stuff works tremendously well. And yet it's usually a spear phishing, right? A voice phishing campaign, a human error, something. Somebody didn't toggle a button. Somebody clicked on something they shouldn't, that typically gets threat actors into an organization, and then they can go deep. I mean, look at, were you going to say something, Kim?
Well, I was just going to go back to that was what we talked about last week, was the human element of cybersecurity. It continues, like, how long is this going to last? How long is it going to take, you know, the bottom person of the chain at an organization that's sitting in their cubicle, that's on their lunch break, that, like you said, is just looking at a YouTube video or looking at something. And it's just so easy. You and I get those emails all the time. Mine usually, you know, we probably have security on our computers that they're going into extra spam filters. But I mean, is there ever, you know, when I mean, look at SolarWinds, now it's being blamed on an intern, you know, so what's the resolution of this?
Well, and that's interesting, you see, because I hadn't heard this being blamed on an intern. Maybe it is, you know, maybe it isn't. But the point is that absolves the company of responsibility. And that's not quite right. I mean, it's for sure, an intern, an employee, we have responsibility. But oftentimes, corporations set out let's say, a anti-phishing education program more as a compliance checklist, more as a legality to cover their asses, right? Because what they're saying is, hey, I gave you the training, you clicked on it anyway, you're out the door. This is no way to run an organization of such critical infrastructure, right? I'll pick on Twitter, because I've got a beef against those guys right now anyway, right? So remember last summer of 2020, it was on about early July 4th, I think this was. Yeah, it might have been right around that time, where Twitter was hacked through a phone phishing campaign. So somebody phoned into employees at Twitter. Now watch the cascading errors here. Phoned into an employee at Twitter and managed to get credentials from them over the phone by tricking them. Used those credentials to access high-profile accounts, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Barack Obama, these kinds of people. Sent out a tweet saying, hey, I'm feeling generous. If you donate $1,000 of Bitcoin, you'll get 2,000 back, and I'll donate to your favorite charity, something like that. Sounds improbable to us now, but within 4 hours, they had amassed $118,000 they'd stolen from people. Now, this starts with human error, but it also begs the question, why did those people who were picking up the phone at Twitter have admin privileges to high-profile accounts? Why does an intern at SolarWinds why does an intern have access to accounts that can then topple the entire organization? It's not right just to blame them. And I think I want to tackle that this coming Friday. And it's going to be a fun conversation, Kim.